Hello there. I'm here to argue that economic liberalism does create world peace. Maybe not now, but in the future, I do think it can. And I'm just using the EU as an example, as well as just some free trade and some economic principles, pretty much. So here I just have let me just make sure it's there. Okay, I just have the picture from the YouTube video that we were said to watch, depicting the GDP of the EU countries that joined roughly right after they have joined. As you can see, the GDP does increase. This is the GDP per capita. And since GDP and GDP per capita aren't really good estimates of a company being in good shape or not, but it is a pretty good thing to follow, at least, just with the information that we can get. Um, so just in general, the EU was created. I just have notes here, that's why I'm looking down. So the EU was created just to avoid war by pretty much the definition of liberalism, by having the countries that join the EU to be interdependent of one another. And through having interdependence, it's pretty much like a precaution or an insurance that there won't be any more war, conflict, violence, bloodshed, or whatever. And so far it has worked. I've been to Europe a couple times. It's pretty safe overall. GDP has increased. And that's probably the most important thing, as just because if a country's GDP increases, not a company, if a country's GDP increases, that's just incentives. A country wouldn't want to do poorly; they want to do as best as they can. So through interdependence, through free trade, through specialization, countries can do extremely well. If you just see a term that we discussed in economics class and macroeconomics is that if a company or if a country doesn't specialize, doesn't do free trade, and imposes pretty much tariffs on themselves and just isolates them, that puts a gap on how far they can go economically. And theoretically, countries want to do as best as they can in terms of GDP and in terms of GDP per person, GDP per capita. They want their citizens and their country to strive as good as possible. So it only makes sense then, theoretically, that economic liberalism, which stresses interdependence between countries, that just in terms of just to make sure that they're safe, it would also make sense if they would do that not only to be safe, not only to be sound, not only have insurance that wars won't happen, but to also increase their GDP. So again, theoretically, it is a win-win-win. You have interdependence, you have free trade, you have specialization, you have increased GDP per person rapidly, and you also lift off the the ceiling of that country, as if a country only does not deal with free trade, does not have any specialization, does not have any real input on the global economy, that country can't strive any more than the peak, and it's not that high. So it only makes sense that a country would want to either do something like the EU, or perhaps some other organization, other group, or just maybe an EU version of the entire global economy, because that would then allow them to ensure their safety and not have conflicts with other nations in that same system, as well as increase their GDP exponentially. And yeah, I mean, if it works for the EU, why wouldn't it work for anyone else? And it does, in theory, work as well. It's not like EU is just a rare scenario where it did work. A country wants to thrive. A country wants to do good. A country, especially in liberalism, wants to have safety. It's a more, I mean, I guess my personal take on it is liberalism is a lot more open-minded than realism. And the liberalist approach in general just wants no war. It doesn't want any conflicts and just wants to strive, and doesn't believe that you have to push other people down for you to go above. And yeah, I mean, a country would want to do as best as possible. The EU, just the system itself of what the EU follows and just how it played out shows that it can definitely work, and it will work as long as they do abide by the proper rules and do want a decent outcome. I know some countries don't really care about their citizens or their GDP, and it's just fully, extremely corrupted. But I don't really think they are the majority. So I do believe that interdependence economically can provide world peace, maybe in 10, 15 years, maybe in 100 years. I do believe it is possible, though. I don't believe it's out of the question whatsoever. That's just my take on it. Thank you.